Welcome to another edition of the HBD Chat. I'm your host, James Hansen. Today, we have one of our very important strategic partners in the Harrison's chain, Mr. Dave Vetter, and he's going to speak with Dr. Harrison about organic farming and the many other topics that they've worked together on. Dr. Harrison?
Thank you, James. I'm happy to have this opportunity to have a deep dive conversation with someone who I've admired for 40 years, who began a business relationship that's deepened into a mentor relationship. Actually, I look to David for all kinds of things, not only in my business, but in my personal life. And he's influenced my philosophy and my appreciation for the environment and the soil, just all kinds of things. So David is not the president any longer of Grain Place Foods, I saw on the website the other day, but he started Grain Place Foods with his dad shortly after 1953. I guess they started the farm. And if you want to get a good deep dive on what this is all about, David and his family, we're going to suggest with a link at the end of this to see Dreaming of a Better World.
I hear there was a newspaper headline that said Don Vetter no longer considered crazy.
Well, that wasn't me, that was my son.
Oh.
He's the one that wasn't crazy anymore.
From my perspective, David Vetter definitely was a pioneer.
Leaders like David Vetter paved the way to change the direction of agriculture.
We grow a variety of crops in a complex 9-year rotation. The diversity that we have in the rotation reduces any requirement or need to add additional pesticides like insecticides or herbicides.
Well, why doesn't everybody do that?
I think most people don't do it because it's more work and it takes more thought.
David Vetter supplies most of the ingredients for Harrison's Bird Foods. He was trained in agronomy and soil science at the University of Nebraska. He did his stewardship on theology with the United Theological Seminary and came back to Nebraska to farm, I believe, in somewhere around the 50s or 60s. That's not that important.
I'm not that old.
No, that was your dad in 53, right?
Yes.
Recently, an interesting thing happened for David. He was acknowledged by Bonner soaps. And here's what they said. Farming is activism. How we treat the soil, water, plants, animals, and workers is a political act that can be created and expanded to circles of health and justice. David Vetter inspires us and shows us how this is possible. So David and his family movie will carry that into a deeper subject, but let's start out today, David, maybe talking a little bit about how your life has changed since you did the Dreaming of a Better World movie. And of course, now with the COVID-19 shutdown, how's your life changing?
Oh, I'm still trying to figure that out. One of the things that changed for us almost immediately was the number of requests to participate in screenings and film events around the country. And I always enjoy the travel, so that was kind of a nice perk on the end of it. But the one thing that I found a little difficult to handle was that a lot of people I visited with in those trips were thinking that I'm a whole lot smarter than I actually am. And I can only work from what our experience has been and what we've learned and what we're still trying to learn. So that part has been really interesting, but I guess I'm surprised at the number of people that have told me after seeing the film and stuff that they're seeing things a little differently than they did before. So maybe that's a good outcome.
I think with the COVID-19 shutdown, at least this morning I was looking at my computer and there was a notice coming famine because of lack of food. And then we see all the people worrying about not getting meat and not getting chicken and not getting pork and all those things. You see that that's going to shut down organic farming as well as it's shutting down the conventional C.A.F.O farming?
No, I don't. We're busier than we've ever been. Just reviewing our situation here related to this in March and April. On our website, we sold almost double what we had forecast for the year just in those 2 months. And we could have sold a lot more, except we're out of stock, not because we don't have product, but because we don't have packaging. Packaging was in the pipeline, but we were redoing some labels, so it really caused us to scramble and see if we can't get packaging materials here to get it out the door. So that's been a little bit of a surprise. We expected it to increase some, but nothing like that. And the products out there, the bigger issue for us in sourcing product is finding the quality we need. The growing season the last couple of years have left us with a lot less quality in the organic grains that we source. I think we finally found some rye that we could use, but I think we probably rejected 10 or 15 different samples that came in because the quality just wasn't sufficient to make the quality of product that we want to make. And I think that goes back to impacts of changing climate and different changing production environments, all of which influence the quality of the crop you can grow.
I know you've had conventional farming all around grain-based foods forever, but isn't the impact of conventional farming with the C.A.F.O raising animals in confinement and all these terrible things that have happened with the swine being killed and the turkeys and chickens being killed, that's had a tremendous impact on your farmers in the area, right?
Not very many big livestock farmers in our immediate area, but they're still depending on that whole supply chain, and feed demand goes down when all of those things get pulled out of the production system. And that kind of concentration, you get one failure, it kind of cascades down the supply chain and it impacts everybody in the end. We have too few people doing it, and the organic system, I think, is more diffuse, which is a check on that kind of concentration. We don't have the huge bottlenecks that we see in conventional processing. It's moving that way, which I think is bad, but I think it's telling us that we need to really think about shortening up the supply chains in our food system and eating closer to home.
I know when we've gone to your farm tour days, we've heard how you have a lot more birds on your farm, you have a lot more, you don't need to do as much irrigation. There's a whole bunch of reasons that your farm is a model for what we're trying to do with farming in the United States. Whereas on the other hand, we've got these huge farming operations of C.A.F.Os and grain that's really degrading the environment. And they say that's one of the major causes of these pandemics is what we're doing to the natural world. You have that same philosophy?
Well, pretty much. What we have to learn to do is to live and work with the natural system or with nature or our local ecology, and treat it as an equal partner, not as something that we're out to conquer or dominate. We have a long history of trying to do that, and we've never won that battle. And the more concentrated we get and the more clever we think we are in trying to manipulate it, the farther behind we get. And we just saw a reference in an article the other day that for every insect pest we have, there are probably over 1,000 different natural enemies out there that we tend to kill and are more sensitive to the pesticides that we use to control the pest than the pests are over time. So, but we keep repeating the same pattern, just with stronger stuff, and which degrades our natural reserves of natural predators, just depletes that even at a faster rate.
So your main emphasis that I've gotten is the quality of the soil. Can you tell us about what's the difference between dirt and soil Start there.
Well, when I took my first soils class at the university, it told me the difference between soil and dirt was soil was what you grew crops in. The dirt, that's what you found under the bed. But, you know, some of the soils that we see in pulling samples around fields that are conventionally farmed, even when you look at research plots and you walk across the field, you can feel the difference. It's more compact. You've got higher bulk densities. You need more airspace, more, you know, I was showing some folks around looking at the farm, trying to illustrate a little bit different here. We were looking at soils in a field that was conventionally farmed, and although it was moist and wet, we barely left a footprint. But when we got over in our farm, walking in the same kind of cropping system, we were leaving footprints that were an inch to an inch and a half deep.
And what do you think causes that sponginess?
Relates to the quality of the organic matter, the amount of active organic matter you have in that soil surface, and the fact that we haven't put chemicals on it that destroy that natural soil structure and use up the organic matter that binds the soil particles together. So it's real fine texture instead of having a crumbling structure.
And you're also talking about, on occasion, that the nutrient quality coming out of those hard, compact soils reflect that same thing, right?
Well, in that kind of a system, its ability to hold and exchange nutrients for plant growth is limited. When you've got more dynamic organic matter and humus fractions in your soil, its ability to hold and exchange nutrients is much greater, and it can become a reserve, and it is also a host for a lot of beneficial soil bacteria that can actually, in their life cycle, become food or make food for our plants that we want to grow. So
it's really hard to, I know talking to the farmers in your area over the years, it's very hard for them to understand the long term. They seem to look at their checking account and say, you know, I need $1,000, so I'm going to grow XYZ this way, and then I'll grow some organic things, but I'm not going to do it 100% organic. I'm going to do it certified. Maybe you could explain the difference between the different certifications.
Oh, well, there's all kinds of certifications out there.
Why is that?
And well, we've got non-GMO, we've got grass-fed, we've got gluten-free, we've got organic certification, but under USDA and federal law, if you're going to market an organic product, it has to be certified by the NOP or an approved certifier from NOP. So there's that piece. There's nothing that is equivalent or equal to organic certification. If you can do all of the others, that's fine if you want to do that, but they just add on to it. And it's a lot better situation now than it was before we implemented the National Organic Program almost 20 years ago now. When we were working with certification programs back in the late 70s into 1990, it was all over the place. And having looked at a number of them during that time, most of them weren't very good. And the standards have improved. And under the National Organic Program, it's designed for continuous improvement. And there's things that we felt were acceptable in the early 80s, for example, that now are prohibited because what we've learned about their negative impact on soil and ecological health are something that we didn't understand at the time. And so they've been pulled out of use in an organic management system.
What's wrong with GMOs, David? Their purpose is to grow more food and feed more people. How can that be wrong?
Well, if that actually worked, that might be okay, but it doesn't. The biggest thing that it's done in agriculture is facilitate the use of more synthetics that have a huge negative impact. As it is today, I mean, we can use manures for our fertilizer or soil amendment in organic agriculture, but I would not take any manure source from a C.A.F.O that you fed conventional GMO crops just because of the glyphosate residue and its negative impact. It's an antimicrobial, and I think the last thing you'd want to put on your soil is an antimicrobial. Makes no sense to me. And so we've seen a lot of that, plus the negative impact that I think it probably also has on the human microbiome, as well as that of all of your livestock and stuff that's consumed that. So that's just one of the pieces, but it also dominates the landscape with a single species or a very narrow set of genetics, which loses resilience in the long run, I think. And if we're too prescriptive with what we do in applying GMOs, I think that potentially eliminates new opportunities to learn something new or to see something new develop. And we don't need to try to second guess what the future is going to bring. It's quite clear that we haven't done a very good job of that in the last few months when we look at the recent issues with the pandemic. So the other thing is I haven't seen anybody demonstrate to me that we're actually smart enough to be that prescriptive.
And I noticed at the farm tour that I was last at, the gentleman from India, from Telsey Tea, gave a presentation of why they decided to go away from GMOs and conventional farming and hybrid seeds. Could you give us a brief summary of what happened in India and it's happening in other countries too, I understand.
A lot of those systems were input intensive, and in the poorer quality soils, that required more and more, and by doing it, shifting to an organic system, they could build soils naturally with the resources and materials they had. And it also gave them access to higher value markets. So they could actually make a living growing organic stuff on a small scale when they couldn't do that with the GMOs in the more industrial market. That was a big piece in the whole bigger economic picture and the dynamic of that. Plus, they were able to do that with a whole lot less risk to their personal and their family and community health. All of which is, I think, compromised by synthetics that we tend to use in food.
Well, he was making it sound like they couldn't produce enough crop using those without all those inputs, and so they decided to try to go 1 year using some of those GMO seeds without all the inputs, and they couldn't grow it at all.
Yeah, so, there are a couple of states, I believe, now in India where any kind of GMO stuff is banned, and it's because of their experience with that.
Yeah,
and I think it's too prescriptive in its application and its use.
Well, the same thing that they're doing with confinement animal feeding operations is what I see they're trying to do with farming and hydroponics. They want to become more and more mechanical and high tech. We need a weather station, we need soil analysis, we need all these things to make money for everybody but the farmer. And that's when I think it's really an eye-opener to see you don't irrigate your soils as much as other farmers have to. You don't have to put the fertilizers on it. You don't have to pay those exorbitant prices for seeds. It just seems to go on and on.
We haven't used any outside inputs on the farm other than seed and fuel. This will be, I think, year 20 or 21. I'm not sure. And we're still learning as we go. It's really the impact of a year's management for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years can be pretty significant. And in our transition from the amazing work that my brother-in-law did on the farm while he was managing that operation to new managers now over that time period, we're seeing the impact of a couple of managers in there that didn't pay enough attention to the details, and the impact now we're just finally starting to work our way out of that. But some of the things that we learned early on is that if we make a mistake and screw up, we kind of know what we have to do to fix it. But we also have to be patient because we know some of that could take 3, 4, and 5 years to rehab and get back to where we're working with more balance in the whole system.
If we're going to grow organic farming, which is obviously what I feel we need to do, and you do too, how do we get that education to people like the young man you have working on your farm now? It'd be great if you had a couple hundred students there. I know.
We're working on it. So we need to develop a lot of infrastructure to be able to work with more students and interns, and I think we'll get there eventually. But one of the things that I think is helpful And it's some of my friends that I worked with that have helped grow some big companies that are farmer-based. Farmers may get interested in it because of the price differences in the marketplace there. But if they stick with it, they'll stick with it because it's changed how they understand how the farming works that way, what happens with soil, what happens with cropping systems, and the value that brings to their farming operation, and their commitment to being more holistic in their approach. And if they make that choice and they decide to stay with it, they can turn out to be pretty good farmers, and we've seen a lot of them do that. But it seems that the thing that gets more attention immediately for more people is the market value of the crops they produce.
We're seeing some new terms come out like regenerative, sustainable, all those things. Are those better than organic, or they're just ways to improve organic?
If you're looking at something just called sustainable or regenerative management system, it's not organic. It doesn't go far enough, but it moves that direction. So anything that we can do in the broader production environment that reduces the use of synthetics is an advantage to everybody. And so, you know, the less poison farmers put on what's ultimately going to be your lunch, the better off you're going to be. And those kinds of diverse systems will help reduce that. And so I see that as the real positive. And I think once farmers move that direction, it'll be easier for them to take that next step and maybe go full organic in the process. A lot of them don't like the idea of the certification and stuff, but you got to do something to guarantee the difference that you make. And, you know, perhaps the system needs to be turned around, that if you're going to be using synthetics, you need to be documenting that and be a certified user of those rather than having to be certified that you don't do it. And sometimes it's kind of hard to prove you don't do what you don't do.
Right.
And we based a lot of our certification programs on that, but there is a line built into that system that you need to be able to show continuous improvement, but we haven't done a good job of documenting that. The regenerative organic certification, which is new, last year was a pilot program year, and we were fortunate enough to be one of the pilot programs in that. I think we were actually the only row crop farm in the whole program that was certified. And so until we can, that's an add-on to the National Organic Program. So if you're not NOP certified, you can't become certified this way. And it's an add-on because you have to be able to demonstrate your improvement in soil quality and soil health and how your management program works. And so demonstrating soil quality, wildlife habitat, wildlife diversity, any kind of diversity you can get into your local ecosystem that's contextual is a kind of a scoring piece on that. And then it also has a division on animal welfare and social justice. So we're adding these other components to that certification.
I see a lot of people are changing their mind about, one of my veterinary students has been complaining about animal agriculture and how terrible it is for the animals and methane release and all that stuff. But all of a sudden, she realizes that cows are wonderful things and that she'd like to have a place where she takes care of cows that aren't wanted anymore. What about the humane care of animals that we see? These C.A.F.Os certainly can't be humane.
Yeah, I think an animal being able to express its normal behavior is really important. I think you'd get better quality products. You have fewer health issues. You know, cows mate to eat grass, and we stuff them full of corn or distillers grains or whatever, and they're just not developed that way. And the appreciation for that and what they can do to the land. We probably have fewer animals now than we did when the buffalo owned the whole central United States up into Canada. So there's probably fewer ruminant animals out there now than we had back in that day. And
but do you see organic farming in the future without animals?
No.
Yeah.
Animals have been absolutely critical to us developing the soil quality and structure that we develop. we put it off, and we kept putting it off because it was going to cost something to shift to animal production. And when we started out, when I came back to the farm, my father had to leave in 1960 because of health issues carried over from his experience in World War II. I came back after graduate school, didn't own any machinery, so cash flow was really critical, and we had to make some choices based on cash flow more than on soil health and good cropping systems, and compromise that and kind of work our way out of it. And it wasn't a fast process, but even in 1975, $1,500 didn't go very far on a used tractor, and now it takes about that much to buy a tire, I think. But anyway, so our focus had to change, but it was still always long-term vision was soil quality and soil health. I suppose one of the things that probably convinced my neighbors I was really nuts that we sold hay, which I don't like to sell because that sells more nutrients off the farm. But if I couldn't get a certain price for it, I hauled it back out on the field where I took it off, because I felt like in the long term it was worth more to me than the cash was in the short run. But I don't understand why farmers don't think 10, 20, and 30 years down the road. We often make decisions like we're only going to farm one more year, and that doesn't make sense to me. If you're going to make the investment and want to start farming, I think you would want to think about the long-term management and your independence from being dependent on the big ag or anybody else outside of your own operation.
I know there's an operation, at least I'm invested in my own farm there, where we're not using animals, and they're still organically certified, but they bring in teas from different products and things like that. And I think the long run, we're not building up the soil. We're selling an organic product, but we're not building up the soil for the future.
Yeah, it's gonna help, but it's not. I don't think it's ever going to get there, because I don't think you can do as well as you can when you grow it in place. And the value of grazing in our cropping system here at the farm that we see has a lot to do with our grazing patterns, because when you graze that grass down, the perennial grasses are sloughing roots because they don't need them to support what's left, and as it grows, they grow more new roots. So we keep putting organic matter back in there. Every time we graze, we put more organic matter back into the soil profile, and it makes such a huge difference over time. And the root exudates and all the enzymes and stuff that they excrete, and we've seen a huge development in the mycorrhizal systems within the fields. You know, to see mushrooms show up in our row crops and stuff during the growing season, something we never ever saw in the first 25, 30 years.
And your father, as I recall, was a door-to-door salesman selling typical things to put on crops to make them do better. And he obviously felt that wasn't working. That's why he went back to.
He did some of that, and especially in the late 40s, after he went to the short course program for returning vets from World War II at the university. One of the first probably custom applicators for pesticides and fertilizers in the county back in the late 40s. I had a neighbor when I came back asked me if I was going to farm organic, and I said, well, you know my dad, so what do you think? He says, okay, you're going to farm organic, but he apologized for even asking the question, and I said, no, that's fine. And then he said something that surprised me a little bit, but that I really appreciated. He says, just remember, when in the day when he was promoting the chemicals, I can't say I remembered it because I was like 3 and 4 years old at that time. Everybody said he was crazy, but when he made the decision in '53, that was, I think, 7 at the time, everybody said he was crazy. And then he said, just remember, he was right the second time. So some of us do on occasion learn from our mistakes.
I noticed one of the things you're doing in the chat I saw the other day is you're starting to plant nuts around your farm, and you're going to increase the number of hogs. Is that right?
Well, I don't know that we're going to increase the number, but we're going to manage them differently. Our idea is that we'll have them out on pasture and rotate them through our pastures on the 4th year, prior to when we're going to take them out and convert them back to crop ground for another 3 or 4 years, so that we increase the diversity on the land. And that way, if they tear pastures up a little bit, it's not a significant loss. I certainly couldn't afford to put them on a pasture that I just seeded and have them tear it up too much that first year. Seeding a new pasture, the seed cost per acre on that can run anywhere from $100 to $150 an acre. So you got to get a few acres worth of production out of that when you put that much seed into it. But the nutrient value, the soil structure, the water holding capacity that you get with the perennial grasses and stuff in the rotation is just amazing. Always wished I had done it sooner, but I don't know how I could have paid for the process of making that shift very much earlier than what we did.
And why'd you choose nut trees?
Potential food source for the hogs, potential cash crop. So I think we've got, he just told me today, he's got 300 and some hazelnuts they're getting ready to plant. And we're rehabbing a pasture that my dad did the primary seeding on back in the mid 50s. And it's been touched up here and there with a little bit of seeding and stuff once or twice in between, but we've totally rebuilt the terraces and the waterways. And now we're going to be planting some of those trees and shrubs on contours so that we can graze in between them and around them if we want to, or we can fence them off and use them for a nut harvest. But we're also including in that some fruit trees. We've got some hedgerows with apricots, and we're going to be, I think, looking at grafting some stuff in there so we can add some other fruits in that same family to grow in that rootstock and try to increase its diversity a little bit.
Tell us about your challenge with drift from dicamba. Maybe the public doesn't know what dicamba is or why that's significant, but maybe you could fill us in.
Dicamba is a pretty broad spectrum herbicide that kills just about anything that's broadleaf. And you've probably heard pieces in the news here of a year and a half or so ago, the drift caused such a rift in northeast Arkansas that one neighbor shot another one, dicamba damage. So it's significant. The manufacturer, Monsanto, just lost a major court case because they destroyed several acres of peach orchard. And it was a problematic material when it was used back in the mid 70s. That was our first experience with herbicide drift. It was like the 4th year, I think we were farming or something like that. I can't remember, 5th. Just the loss on soybeans in one field was about $45,000 of cash income that we really needed. And that was just the difference in yield between exposed crop and that missed the drift. Now they've developed GMO resistance to dicamba, so it's even easier to apply, and they're supposed to have short windows. But one of its main problem is it volatilizes under the right atmospheric conditions, so it can actually drift out of the field a couple, 3 days after it was applied. Our experience this last year was pretty clearly that was the case, because if it had been an application error, it probably would have outright killed stuff. As it was, it just held it back and stunted it for probably 3 to 3.5 weeks.
Wow.
But it impacted the whole farm. I mean, we saw it on our apricot trees. We saw it on the wild plums. We saw it on some of the weeds in the soybean field, which it was supposed to kill. It probably had the least impact on those. But we saw it on everything. Covered the whole farm from, we're just about a full half section, and we saw it on every aspect of the farm.
One of the things that I've followed is there's a label on those pesticides that tells you how to mix it. But when I start looking at the different agriculture magazines, they say, oh, you also need to, it's not on the label and you probably shouldn't do this, but you can add this and you can add that. So they're taking like maybe 4 or 5 products and combining them to do these weed killing and insect killing.
Well, yeah, some of them are doing that. I have not experienced that in my own area but I have friends up in Dakota that raise specialty crops, and they had a lot of problems with pesticide drift. And collecting samples and analysis, they found combinations that clearly were not legal label use. And I suspect there's a lot more that goes on than what we actually know about.
Tell me about your experience with honeybees on the farm.
Yeah, we had in the 90s, we lost, my brother-in-law keeps bees here. He lost almost all of his bees. This last year, we lost them all. And I think the neonic insecticides now are having quite an impact on health, and which limits their survival, even if it doesn't outright kill them. And the pin cap is a micro-encapsulated material that was brought back when they harvested pollen from the cornfields, and then was fed to the brood. I mean, you know where our honeybees are and where the plant is. A couple of years, the number of honeybees that it killed piled up outside the hives. You could actually smell the rotting bees from the plant out in the bee yard, which is probably 120 yards away. And so it was pretty devastating, quite expensive, and it's a struggle now to keep bees alive.
One of the other things I learned, there's a gentleman named Dr. Gundry who's been publishing a book on leaky gut syndrome, but one of the things that I found fascinating was his discussion about lectins and how those are in different grains and things, and that those are some of the reasons that GMO crops are so dangerous, is there are more lectins and more anti-bug things in those than they're talking about. Like if they add neonicotide to it, they have to say it.
Yeah, well,
they genetically engineer it to have more insect fighting chemicals in it naturally, if you want to call that naturally, then they don't have to say that. So a lot of people think GMOs, oh, they're just a way to grow more food. It's also a way to prevent bugs that we don't even get told about.
Yeah, they keep saying we're using less pesticide, but you look at the usage of pesticides since the introduction of GMOs, and overall the tonnage has gone way up. But what they never tell you about when they have that discussion is the amount of pesticide that they actually grow in the crop they grow, because it's in every cell, and especially the BT crops and those BT toxins in there. What do they do to the microbiome? I don't think anybody really understands that or really has a clue about what that does, because it's in every cell, so it's in whatever you eat as well. And in a more typical application where that insect pest would consume the BT organism as opposed to munching on the plant, those toxins are only going to be produced in the gut of that particular insect, not in the whole food supply.
Right.
So those are another whole set of issues that don't make sense to me either. I guess that's one of the things that really kept me doing it, because of my experience in college. Why would you want to expose your food or have that kind of material on your food? I would be very uncomfortable selling somebody something that I sprayed with something like that, because I know it can't be good for them.
Yeah, well, my wife, in preparing my notes for today, gave a quote along that line from the very famous Jane Goodall. Someday we will look back on this dark era of agriculture and shake our heads. How could we have ever believed it was a good idea to grow our food with poisons? So
I borrow that frequently.
It's just astounding, and I see that a lot of people in different areas now are very excited about hydroponics, because you don't need insecticides, you don't need the GMOs, but I'm sure they're probably using it. Why don't you think that's going to take over?
Well, it dominates a lot of the stuff you see on the fresh market shelf these days, especially a lot of specialty berries and stuff like that. I don't think we understand enough that we can put in that synthetic growing medium or that liquid mix to meet all of the nutrient needs. And for me, if it's an organic crop, you can't do organic hydroponics. It's a soil-based system. There's so many things going on in soils and soil communities and stuff that we can't recreate that in a synthetic medium or a synthetic liquid mix that we put together. And you can, if you get something grown in quality soil and something grown in hydroponics, there's no taste comparison in terms of flavor. If you've had conventionally grown stuff and that's what you're used to, and the quote unquote organic hydroponic production of that same crop is probably going to taste better because it actually will have more balance, but I don't think that can still measure up to something grown in healthy soil.
It would probably not contribute to these environmental issues that we're talking about unless there's something down below hydroponic. What do you do with the water that comes out of a hydroponic facility?
Well, a lot of that's recirculated.
Yeah.
And stuff. So I don't know, because quite frankly, I haven't taken the time to study the system and I wouldn't use it. So there's a lot of other things that I could spend my time with that'd be more useful to me. But yeah, I've always questioned that. Pretty neat system conceptually, but I don't think we're smart enough yet.
Do you think
I think that's the biggest thing we've proved in agriculture over the last 100 years, that we're not smart enough to make the decisions we make. The only thing we consistently prove.
Well, that's kind of a shame, but at least we got somebody keeping track. Do you think the Midwest is ready for small farms, 10 acres, 20 acres, and farm to market operations? Do you think that's got a future, or what's going to
term? Yeah, near term, I don't think so, because for a community and a broader community that we have out here that talks about feeding the world, that can't even feed themselves and are unwilling to pay what it takes to grow good food, to sustain a small farmer on a small acreage like that, producing high quality food. We see a number of them struggle with it for years and then finally give up, because if they reach a point where they can't even subsidize it well enough with off-farm work to make it work financially for them. But we seem to have a real aversion to paying for quality, healthy food. And I don't understand that piece. I have a little bit of a thing that bothers me with a lot of organic farmers. They won't buy organic food because it's too expensive, but they expect somebody else to buy what they grow at a price for a quality product. Why wouldn't you support your own business? I don't get that piece.
Yeah.
I try to go out of my way to buy organic, and a lot of times I don't buy stuff I like because I can't find it organic. So,
well, that's the number one.
I give up on it too many times too, but
yeah, that's the number one message we want people to understand is you might be asking yourself, what can we as an audience do to change the environment, to change the farming community? And I think the best thing I've heard is vote with your pocketbook. You don't have to go out and buy an organic farm. There's people out there that are wanting to do that. They need you to buy their products.
The most powerful tool you've got to do that is how you use your fork.
Yeah. And how you grow your food matters, right?
How you produce your food does matter, yes. The more we use that, the more I like it. And I stole that phrase, but at least with permission. Hey, thank you.
How you grow your food matters. And I'd just like to let the whole audience know that anybody that buys their popcorn or their grain cereals, they'll never go back to anything else. We get it shipped in 25 bags at a time. Well, thank you so much, David Vetter, for your afternoon with us. We look forward to interview you in the future, and I'm so grateful for you as a friend and a business partner. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the HBD Chat, a production of HBD International Inc., Harrison's Bird Foods, and Wild Wings Organic Wild Bird Foods. We're always looking for interesting guests and new topics to discuss. We'd love to hear your feedback and thoughts about this podcast. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and our YouTube channel.